Hello and welcome to Afternoon Tea with Karen and more stuff from the United Nations.
The events since October 7 have been absolutely overwhelming. And that means they're overwhelming for everybody, but particularly for the people who are experiencing them, those who are suffering, the victims. It's regularly said that October 7 represented the greatest killing of Jewish people since the Holocaust, and that's correct. What's said less frequently is that the killing of Palestinians since then represents the greatest slaughter of Palestinians in their recorded history. And so there is a lot of suffering to go round. People are suffering in Israel and the Jewish diaspora, Palestinians in Palestine and in the Palestinian diaspora also suffering greatly, and now Lebanese people as well. It really is absolutely overwhelming.
Okay, so to the detail of your report now, and firstly to the accusations against Israel, what led you to the very clear conclusion that Israeli security forces are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity?
The evidence led us to that conclusion. We work by collecting evidence first. We don't make any assumptions. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that we are inherently sceptical of all assertions made by any of the actors in these particular circumstances. We take everything with great scepticism and we seek the facts ourselves. So we collect the evidence first, we make conclusions about what the evidence indicates, so findings of fact, then we apply the law to it and we make our legal statements. In this case, the evidence was overwhelming. Our last report in June looked at the circumstances in southern Israel on the 7th and 8th of October and the violence of the Palestinian armed groups. It also looked at events in Gaza from those dates, 7 October, until the end of 2023. And we found in both cases the commission of the most serious war crimes. Our latest report, as you indicated, Joe, released a couple of weeks ago, looks at three issues: the destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza, the treatment of Palestinian detainees and prisoners in Israel, and the treatment of Israeli hostages in Gaza. And in each case, again, we have found the commission of the most serious war crimes and crimes against humanity. In relation to the healthcare system, we have found intentional, concerted efforts to destroy the healthcare system in Gaza. That's putting it very baldly, but those are the facts. The destruction of hospitals, clinics, other forms of healthcare centres, ambulances, and the killing of literally hundreds of doctors and healthcare workers. We found war crimes and crimes against humanity in relation to the Israeli treatment of prisoners. The fact that they are tortured and mistreated, denied adequate food and access to medical care, subjected to sexual violence, including rape. And we made similar findings in relation to the treatment of the Israeli and foreign hostages in Gaza. Again, killing, torture and mistreatment, sexual violence, deprivation of adequate food, water and health care. So the situation is truly overwhelming.
Israel argues that you are biased and that this is a blatant attempt to obstruct its right to defend its population. What do you make of Israel's argument that Hamas hides among civilians and health facilities and that Hamas is responsible for those deaths because of that tactic?
Well, first, Hamas is not responsible for the deaths. One of the issues that we addressed in our report in June was that the whole strategy behind the Israeli campaign in Gaza, that is the basic modus operandi of the fighting, has been such as to violate fundamental principles of international humanitarian war. The lack of distinction between civilians and combatants, the lack of proportionality, the unreasonableness of the responses. These principles apply regardless of the situation on the ground, and Israel has violated those principles. We've looked at the issues about the use of human shields, if you like, the violation of civilian property by Hamas. We have found some evidence of that, but only limited evidence. One difficulty we faced is the non-cooperation, indeed the obstruction, by the Israeli authorities. They denied us access to the evidence that they have and denied us the opportunity to go and see for ourselves. So we were looking at those issues with one hand tied behind our backs, and it was difficult to do so. So we found some evidence, but we were unable to come to any conclusions as to the extent of that.
And that was Chris Sidoti, who is an independent commissioner with the United Nations and one of 3 commissioners on the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory. From his Wikipedia page, he is a drafting committee member and signatory of the Ukiata Principles Plus 10 on the applications of international human rights laws in relation to sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics, which is this 27-page document with a table of contents, an introduction, and second from the bottom, there he is. Quick overview from Wikipedia. Principles have never been accepted by the United Nations, and the attempt to make gender identity and sexual orientation new categories of non-discrimination has been repeatedly rejected by the General Assembly, the UN Human Rights Council, and other UN bodies. However, it does form the basis of the UN Declaration on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity from 2008. So a lot of this stuff is similar to the Victorian government stuff. And the update in 2017 includes sporting organisations. The reason it was rejected is because a lot of African countries are not into this. Arab states were dismayed. So back to the UN on Israel.
In mainstream media outlets, Israel has been accused of deliberately targeting both aid workers in Lebanon and journalists in Gaza. Have you seen any evidence of this?
Absolutely not. And that's just, to me, a continuation of the disinformation about all the operations. The fact that the United States has said many times that there is not one bit of evidence to show that Israel has targeted civilians, period. Journalists, aid workers, there has been accidents, but the fact that Israel has done more to prevent and to safeguard civilians and those on the battlefield. But this is war. Israel is being attacked. Israel is conducting massive operations. I don't think people understand the scale, even in the north, where Israel has now deployed 5 divisions. Israel doesn't have 5 divisions. It has 2 divisions. So those are Israelis who are trying to get, in the north, Hezbollah to stop raining rockets down on Israel. And then you have Gaza, where Hamas is still launching rockets. So I think that's just more of the disinformation, everything from the fact that there is no genocide, there is no targeting of civilians. There's actually the opposite. It's like a weird counterfactuals when Israel sends hundreds of trucks in daily, does these evacuations, then gets accused of doing something wrong when it's like this tiny nation under attack from all these different directions who is actually doing everything anybody's ever tried in war to prevent civilian harm, to get them out of harm's way. But yeah, this is war.
You were in Gaza, I believe, earlier this year. What about the figure of 40,000 civilians killed in Gaza? Is that figure, as far as you're concerned, is it accurate? And how do you compare the civilian casualties in Gaza with other wars?
Sure. And I've been to Gaza 3 times since October 7th. I was last there in July. I can tell you that the now Hamas Gaza Health Ministry number of 42,000 killed in Gaza is a lie. It's just not true. There's no way you could know the number, but that number itself isn't those that have been killed. That's anybody who has died since October 7th. It includes anybody who died of natural causes, anybody who died by Hamas's hand, who murdered, to include just this week, people trying to flee when they get the notices. It includes anybody who's missing. They just don't know the name. It includes people that died years ago. I can tell you from being on the ground that that number is a lie, and that Israel is actually the civilian to combatant ratio, if we knew the number. Although in Gaza, there's some type of magic system that can tell you how many civilians died. It can't tell you how many combatants died, but they'll tell you how many civilians died within hours. That's never happened in war, and it never will. But they'll tell you within hours, and then mass media runs with it, like 30 killed, 500 killed. But that number it's a lie. It's not true. Israel's civilian to combatant ratio is actually lower because they say, and I believe them more than I believe Hamas, but even if I take both numbers, Israel's actually killed like 20 to 22,000 Hamas. And then the rest are what is believed to be civilians, but there actually is no way to tell that. And when you have this reporting system that is just full of lies.
In terms of the international community accusing Israel of breaching international law, in your view, has Israel been guilty of war crimes? Absolutely not. And I've written that from every angle, every accusation, from the fact that Israel has not been discriminate. It has not been indiscriminate. It has been very discriminate in who it targets, the enemy, only the enemy. It has not been excessive in the use of force. It has not been overwhelming, as in not what the law of war says. In my analysis, to include being on the ground and going with like the actual units on the ground, they're following the law of war, following rules of engagement that are very stringent against the complexity of this enemy in underground cities that nobody else has also faced in war. No, Israel is going beyond the legal requirements and is following their moral, ethical way militaries fight and doing everything to prevent civilian harm. So all of it, the starvation is not true. All of it, it's all a farce of lies. John, what's your comment on the United Nations, both from the positions expressed from its senior leadership, but also that pro-Hamas resolution that was put forward that had majority support in the United Nations General Assembly? Do you think the UN has become an enabler for terrorism? Absolutely. We didn't get here. And I think that's what we're seeing, especially in northern Israel, where the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 and the mandate of UNIFIL of over 18,000 United Nations forces that we, members of the United Nations, pay for, who have completely allowed the entire area to be combat areas for Hezbollah, massive bunkers and stockpiles. The UN is failing. This has been the greatest test of the United Nations since the end of World War II, and it's failing with the Islamic regime in Iran, with all of these proxies, with the way it determines what the law of war is, how it's been co-opted by humanitarian rights groups, how it's become just a political theater, basically. It's really problematic when this is the organization that's supposed to prevent war, and it has gotten us to the situation where we are now, and we need leadership. The United States is sending a THAAD battery missile defense system to Israel, yet at the same time, it's issued a letter threatening to withhold weapons if the situation doesn't improve in Gaza. What message do these conflicting messages send to Iran? I mean, I think so for Iran. I mean, I think we are in an election season. War is politics. I think that's a huge sign of the strong relationship and the ironclad agreements, and that I'm proud of as an American, that the United States will defend Israel, especially from attacks from another nation state like Iran. So the sending of this very advanced air defense system that will integrate with other defense systems there is a very big sign to Iran to not continue to attack Israel and the ironclad relationship, because that comes with American soldiers, a part of that air defense system. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's a huge step. And I think opposed to this letter, which is, you need to do more about humanitarian aid, it's a giant sign of the actual ironclad relationship between the United States and Israel, as Israel is fighting a seven-front war, which includes drones, missiles, ballistic missiles from
7 different directions, to be honest.
John Spencer, thank you very much for your time.
Well, not much to do except for wait and see what happens. So, until then, see you later. Bye.